Okay, let's get started. So this is our weekly M4 discussion and Q&A. So I've set up five different questions I'm going to walk everybody through on today's session. So if we'll recall this week's messages were really around the concept of proactivity. So being proactive, not reactive. This to me is a classic consultative skill that all good consultants have mastered or continue to try to master. And so when I think about proactivity, proactivity to me means, a constant forward motion toward goals, not waiting for someone else to tell you what to do or be willing to act on your own and learn and adjust going forward. So I'm going to take you through five questions and some concepts to think about. So the first question I want to explore with you is where are you currently waiting for direction when you could be taking ownership? So context around this would be, one of the biggest traps for consultants, especially early in their careers, is believing that being a good team member means waiting for instructions. Strong consultants learn to distinguish between staying aligned and simply waiting. An example of this is, in a client workshop is coming up, or that that a client workshop is coming up on Friday, but nobody's asked you to prepare anything yet. And instead of waiting until Thursday afternoon, you start reviewing the agenda, you identify gaps, you draft questions, and you ask your manager, "Hey, here's what I'm thinking that we need to have ready for Friday. Does this align with your thinking?" That's being proactive. So what I want you to think about in that question for this week as you go forward is where is waiting for direction currently slowing you down? And what could you do to initiate something today without stepping outside of your role? So that's kind of the first action item for you to think about for proactivity. Second question I want to set up for you is how do we anticipate what our clients or our project leaders need from us before they ask for it. So context around this one would be, proactivity is often less about doing more work and more about thinking one or two steps ahead of where you are and where you need to be in the program of the project. So an example of this might be, your client asks every Monday for an update on project risks. Well, rather than waiting for Monday to come and waiting for the client to ask that question on that Monday, maybe you could establish a Friday review where you sit down and you review risks with owners, you come up with mitigation and actions and decisions that are needed. Then you show up Monday morning with all of that information already prepared and ready to go. That changes how people start to see you. You move from being someone who responds to requests, even if you're responding very quickly and very effectively, but you start to be perceived as someone who is being proactive and staying ahead of the work as opposed to waiting for someone to give you direction. So again, kind of the action item for you to think about for coming into next week is where could you take proactive steps and anticipate recurring questions or recurring actions that typically come up? Where could you take proactive actions this week to set yourself up for success next week? So that's question number two. Question number three, we want to go through or explore with you is when you identify a problem, do you bring the problem or do you bring a possible way forward? So again, this is classic reactive thinking or problem identification versus being a proactive leader and solving for problems. So context around this one is, clients and leaders absolutely need to know when something is going wrong. So when something is amiss or awry or there's a sort of a roadblock ahead, leaders and clients need to know that as soon as possible, no question. But being proactive, if you're a consultant, being proactive as a consultant when you see that problem is not simply raising the alarm and pointing out the problem, saying, look, there's a problem. It's about thinking about what might you do or what steps might you take or would you recommend to mitigate that problem or remove that roadblock, and then bring not only the problem but bring recommendations and alternatives to the conversation as well. So an example of this might be a key milestone is likely to slip because the client hasn't provided required data or required input that you've asked for them. So a reactive person might message this way: "We still haven't received the data that we requested," and then that's it. You're done. Versus a proactive approach might sound something like this. We've not received the data required for Thursday's milestone. If we receive it by noon tomorrow, we can still protect the date. However, I recommend we move the milestone to Monday, and I've drafted a communication and identified the downstream impacts. So that's being proactive to think about what mitigating steps you could take, given the fact that the client hasn't provided you the information that you've asked for, versus simply saying, "Hey, can't you haven't provided the data, so we're stuck." Um, so again, as you think about this going forward for next week, what you want to be thinking about is how does bringing a recommendation instead of only reporting the problem change your credibility with the client or with your team leader? Keep that in mind as you go into next week. All right, number four, what is the difference between being proactive and going rogue? So the context around this one is, this is an important distinction for consultants. Proactivity doesn't mean ignoring governance or making commitments that you can't make or you're not authorized to make, or taking decisions that don't belong to you, that they belong to someone else. It doesn't mean that. The goal is initiative alignment, or being aligned, your activities, your initiative being aligned with goals and objectives that have been set forth. So an example of this would be, you notice that the current process is creating unnecessary rework. So going rogue would be simply changing the process without telling anyone, versus being proactive would be gathering the evidence of the challenge or the issue, identifying the root cause, and then outlining a better approach and bringing a recommendation to the appropriate leader or client in this context, so that you can discuss that situation and what your recommendations might be to course correct. Um, so again, as you go into next week, I want you to be thinking about, where is the line between initiative and overstepping? And what does proactive with alignment look like on your current project? Okay, so be thinking about that as you go into next week. And then number five, the last question I want to explore with you here for a couple of minutes is, if you operated with an owner's mindset this week, what would you do differently? So if you operate with an owner's mindset this week, what would you do differently? And this really ties back to one of my central leadership principles, which is, regardless of your title, every consultant can ask themselves these questions. What do I need to do today to help drive success in this business, this engagement, or in this client relationship? That's operating with an owner's mindset. So those are the topics or the questions that I wanted to explore with you today. Thanks so much for participating, and I will repost this in our chat so that you'll have it later, and go back and follow one. Look forward to next Monday morning's Michael's Monday Morning Messages, and on the Wednesday discussion and Q&A, we'll dig in deeper on those topics as well. So I look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again. Have a wonderful day.